Hi, Nikita. So, just to sort of set context, our research has been a deep dive into how people today think about wealth, um, how people look at saving, investing, and managing their wealth today. And it's been quite a journey working together on it. But before we get into the process, we also wanted to talk about how this partnership came about together and what made this research different from what's already there. Since, you've seen, many different projects, you've probably seen a gamut of different research studies. So just trying to understand what made this research different from what's already out there. Um, I guess my first question to you would be, could you share a little bit about Xeno Co-lab's expertise in research and what made this activity with Canvas unique?
Sure. Thanks a lot for getting us on board and also thinking of us when it came to research. So, just to give a little bit background about Xeno. So, Xeno is a service design consultancy. We practice human centricity in different contexts. So, we try to bring out the consumer perspective, human perspective, may it be like consumer or even the backend stakeholders perspective into the context, because a lot of times when companies or any companies in the different contexts are working, they end up focusing a lot on only data or what's coming out in the technology front, what's the latest technology going on,
Right.
and then try to innovate around that. But what we try and help is that, like a lot of other companies and consultancies as well, is that we try to add that humane and human perspective to the whole gamut. So that's where our expertise comes from. We are a very boutique small team where we are a team of designers and researchers and strategists who come together to make sense of different contexts. We consider ourselves like industry agnostic. So we work in finance and healthcare and consumer durables, social impact sectors, development sectors. So we work quite end to end, keeping the human centricity always in the center. So I think that was also one aspect which I would say made this research and this collaboration with Canvas quite unique. Because even though we were talking about wealth management practices and habits, you would see like online and also when you're doing your own research, desk research, you would see a lot of new fintech companies are coming up who are working in the space trying to tackle different aspects of it, but we always end up seeing the data side of it most commonly, even though there is the consumer perspective that is maybe going on somewhere, but it doesn't come so much to the forefront.
Right.
So I think that's where the human centricity became sort of like a uniqueness of sorts in this partnership, where we of course tried and understood, read a lot around like what's the fintech platforms doing these days and what's the bigger wealth management as practice and as habits look like, but understanding directly from the end consumers and understanding their fears and their goals of sorts, I think made it more humane. So I think that also sort of reflects into the report as well, is that you have some data points which shows something and talks about an insight, but supporting it with consumer stories, I think becomes quite holistic in that matter.
Understood. As we spoke about it, we wanted to understand how the next generation's kind of managing their wealth. What is the next generation of wealth builders like? And you spoke about the human centricity of it, but how did a research topic like this also engage your interest?
I think personally, like I think everybody who was working on the project and the entire team
Yeah.
coincidentally was fitting into the target audience anyway. So a lot of us were looking ourselves in some or the other user types that we were talking about, because the age group that we had selected was around 25 to 45, and how are people, urban consumers, looking at wealth? What is it? What does wealth mean at all for people? Because conventionally our parent generation looked at it and managed well differently. So I think personally, I think all of us were interested to know that, oh, this is what I'm doing. So then is there something I can learn that, oh, somebody else is thinking of wealth differently? Is there a better way to think about it? So I think that really helped. And also from our company's perspective as well, if I have to add on, other than this personal interest, of course, is in the past couple of years, of course, because the way our country's fintech landscape is also changing quite diversely, we as company also have started working quite heavily in the space of fintech. Even though the contexts are different, maybe we have helped companies build fintech products, services for marginalized communities, for rural context, or say MSMEs, because there is a lot of innovation anyways happening in the country. So if you see, our country's landscape is quite at a very interesting phase right now when it comes to fintech. So I think uh, this research definitely helped us use that expertise, but also get to know what is the latest behaviors and users' mindset look like today. So I think that really helped in even like sharpening our insights and our viewpoint on this landscape, which already seems quite interesting for our country, especially.
Got it. Uh, could you remember when we first had the discussions or first started our discussions? What were a few initial thoughts when we discussed the project? What was your impression of the brief at that time? What were some thoughts that were going back and forth?
Uh, I would say that when we started talking, even though it felt that we want to understand how do people manage wealth and what is the wealth tech look like.
Yeah.
So this, it was, I think, quite when we started, I think for all of us, it was quite broad and big topic. So I think the initial back and forth and discussions, or even like what we were discussing with your team in terms of doing a kickoff to figure out what are the exact goals. So just I think bucketing out what exactly do we want from that, how much macro to micro do we want to go, how
Yeah.
much behavioral insights to what's going on in the wealth tech platforms and sector is going. So you would see the breadth and the length of this topic was quite large. So I think the initial some time went in thinking and crafting that focus points, figuring out where do we need to pay more attention to, what is the scope, because research sometimes becomes challenging because it ends up feeling that we want to know everything, and this research is going to answer all possible questions in the topic, which it's ideal and great to think, but then we also need to think practically that how much time do we want to spend, how much resources do we have. So I think putting more frame to that, understanding goals and objectives collaboratively, and setting milestones, I think was we were going back and forth in terms of the length and the breadth of the topic.
Got it. And since you mentioned the different research projects that you've worked on, what stood out to you in terms of how this project was structured or how this project was approached? Was there any difference that you saw in the way this was approached?
Yes, I would say, since, as I said, I think it's also sort of linked with the what I said before, since the length and the breadth of the topic and the context was so large, we made sure that we are using like a mixed method research approach for this project, because following only one way to conduct research to understand the context, maybe that wouldn't have been enough, or we wouldn't have understood the entire context and the entire landscape of it. So sometimes in other projects, we end up doing only consumer research. And then for those particular topics, um, just consumer research and what consumers are speaking and their behaviors is enough for us to learn from. But for this, since we also wanted to see what's happening at the industry level, what's happening in the startup industries, what kind of offerings do people already have, but what consumers today are feeling and thinking and behaving like. So, since it had the business side and the consumer side both, we thought of using this mixed method approach of sorts, where we started with secondary research, which gave us reading of like online available material, what other people have done research around, what Indian companies, global companies are talking about Indian wealth tech and wealth management ecosystem. So that gave us like a very broad, bigger picture of what's going on. Then going with like other methods like experts interviews and consumer interviews gave us a lot more behavioral understanding. So I think these two different perspectives getting mixed gave us, I think, a lot of holistic view to the context. I think that's where I think the difference in the project plan looks like. So I think this mixed method research approach worked out really well to get. the holistic viewpoint of the context and the topic.
You mentioned
Yeah.
doing consumer research predominantly for other research projects, and then that is not usually followed up in your experience, backed up by a lot of secondary research and so on. Which was the difference here? Just trying to understand that.
Uh, I would say that it would be difficult for me to answer in like one like binary way.
Yeah.
But I would say that whenever we are doing only consumer research, sometimes that research comes in a bigger process where the company or we have done already some research big in the beginning or before. So the process or the product at which the state they are, maybe for that just a consumer research is enough, and then that gets followed by something else. So it's a longer process, and then consumer research sits somewhere in the middle with experts interviews, secondary research, and all of those things happening a little later or before in the pipeline. Whereas for this we did everything at once, so that definitely was great, and that's what we recommend to a lot of clients, that let's do this so that we get a good perspective, which we are glad that we could do with this topic for sure. So that's what I would say, that consumer research generally, even though it feels that it's happening in isolation, sometimes it is backed by some other kind of readings and insights that maybe we or company already have, and then gets followed by the consumer research.
Understood. Okay. Which this is a great segue to talk about our research process and the rigor of it a little bit. You've already touched upon it. It was a multi-stage research exercise which had quantitative as well as qualitative parts. What I'd probably like to ask you is what went into designing the research process in such a way that it ensured both depth and accuracy?
Yeah, I think the crucial part is always whenever we are designing research or research plan, I think it's very one needs to be very intentional in terms of what do we want to achieve at the end of each method.
Right.
Even though the topic is so big, we can't always answer all the questions through each of the method that we are following. So you need to figure out that if you have 10 goals that you want to achieve, all 10 are not going to be achieved through each and every method that you're following. So we need to prioritize and segment out a little bit what is possible to achieve and what can be achieved through which method, just by the pure nature of the research method. So, for example, the things that I can achieve through secondary research would be different than the things that I can achieve from primary research, which is user interviews or interviewing or talking to experts. So, I think that's where the first step is what we took, was after understanding the bigger context and bigger goals that we want to achieve and the kind of answers do we want to have at the end of the project, we try to bucket out what can be done through secondary research. For example, for secondary research, we had set very clear goals in terms of we want to understand the industry landscape. We want to understand which are companies are existing and working in this space. What kind of features and products are they offering? Understanding some data points around sales and usage of certain patterns of the users and those fintech platforms, for example, or what is happening at like a very bigger India well tech industry level. So these are the questions and goals that we had set very clearly for the secondary research, which is achievable and understandable from there. Whereas for consumer research, we focused more on like individualistic habits and fears and patterns and behaviors, which we can get more from the consumer research. So segmenting out the goals and correlating it with the method is something that I think helped us in making sure that the length and the breadth and the accuracy of the insights and learnings that we are having is leading us to that converging point, instead of over trying to like filling everything with all possible questions and answers. Because that is tempting. We want to ask all questions to all experts and all questions to all users, but you need to restrain a little bit to get more accurate and close, in-depth answers.
So that's interesting. What you're saying is to be really judicious about, say, for instance, if there is, I mean, I know that we worked a lot on the screener part of it by
Yeah.
itself. could speak a little bit about that as well. Like, I know we went through quite a lot of rigor over there, and being judicious in terms of what were the number of questions you were asking, what is the quality of the questions you were asking, because this would really form the core, or the backbone of the data that we would gather primarily from participants.
Yeah, that is true. I think since you brought up screeners, I think screener is also, I think, one thing that I would say one checkpoint that makes sure that you are going closer to the goals and accuracy of insights that we are looking for. Because screener defines and filters out the participants that are going to go to conduct interviews and research with. So the screeners, like for example, the way we build is basically a list of questions. I can quickly also share that with all of you. But basically, screeners are list of questions that we ask participants just to make sure that they are fitting into the profile that we are looking for. So, having said that, it doesn't restrict ourselves only to demographic details, which is like age, gender, profession, city that you live in. It's not only about that, but also certain behavioral patterns, like how many apps do you use and how many, let me,
Sure.
yeah. So over here, you would see there are a lot more questions other than the demographic details,
Yeah.
but also in terms of uh, how comfortable they are using technology or how tech savvy they are, or how many apps do they use to manage money and manage wealth, which apps do they use to manage the money that they have. So I think these smaller details also really help in focusing on the target audience that you want, because it's very tempting and it's very easy for a lot of companies to say that everybody is our user.
Right.
But when we say that, I think that just makes it even more complicated, because even though you feel that your product is going to be used by majority, you still need to see that who are going to be your early adopters, who are going to be your laggard adopters, or who are going to be just following the early adopters of sorts. So who do you target on to get go with is something you need to always focus on. So I think that really helped in so the screener really helps in focusing that. And then after we create these screeners, I think then going through creating questionnaires and how many questions do you ask? I think all of these we need to think of, because uh, users also, even though get like, even though as researchers, we are really tempted to ask a lot of questions to our users,
Yes.
we really need to make sure that we are not overburdening them, because fatigue is real, and with all of us losing our focus and attention time, attention span, I think, and so making sure that users are intrigued, they are answering our questions and not losing interest and giving us the insights which are juicy and important is something that we need to be a little bit mindful of.
Got it. Which kind of brings me to the next question, which is how did we approach selecting participants for both these stages, for quantitative and qualitative parts of the project?
So we try and recruit. So user recruitment or participant recruitment is a very commonly used term. What it means is that we are shortlisting and reaching out to participants, research participants who fit the profile. So the way the process goes is that we create this screener, which is like list of some questions that we circulate within the within people, and whoever fits the criteria, we try and shortlist them. But the goal was to have diversity of participants so that we are getting different kinds of perspectives and behaviors. So the criteria that we had set for ourselves is that we wanted to recruit participants from 5 different cities of India, with a mix of metro cities, tier one, tier two cities. So we understand consumer behavior from major urban city consumers. So that was one that we went as a criteria and took as a criteria for us. Then having like a good gender mix was something that we wanted to have, because we do not want we always make sure that we have a good gender balance when we are doing research, because when it comes to especially money, the way maybe different genders look at money and wealth could be different. Their social background, their family background, and constraints could be different. So, and hence the behavior is different. So, the gender was another thing that we made sure we are striking a good balance of. And then as a process, what we did was we have some of our partners who help us identify these users, who circulate the screener to a lot more people than what we need so that we can shortlist and make sure that out of, say, we circulated it to like 200 plus people to shortlist it down to 150 people who we think could be, who fits the criteria, and we can go ahead with the quantitative study for.
Right. And could you also tell me a little bit about our focus on their economic backgrounds? What were we looking for when we were kind of crafting the questionnaire? What was the SEC sectionality
Yeah,
that we're kind of looking at?
yeah. So we wanted to focus on especially people who are um, investing money to grow and not just saving money in their savings account of sorts, or like using, say, FD or using the conventional products which are offered by, say, banks like RD and FD of sorts. So we were very clear that we wanted to look for wealth accumulation or like increasing the wealth and investing in different products, which could be, say, equity or different kinds of investment opportunities. So, with that, we had made sure that we are looking for people who come from SEC A and B. So, from the economic startup perspective, I would say people who are on a very layman's term, I would say middle class and upper middle class and above was something we were looking for, um, because of a few reasons. Is that the way the investment happens, and once you have crossed a certain income is looked at differently. So, and that is why very intentionally for this particular research we made sure maybe we can skip, say, the rural population, for example, because the awareness of savings products and investment products is very different in those regions, whereas we wanted to very intentionally focus on urban young generation who are trying to use these new apps and new platforms to make sure they're like growing their money through investments.
Got it. And how long would you say the participants had the questionnaires for? What were the forms in which we got inputs from them? What was that process like a little bit?
So we did a quantitative study with around 180 participants. So we say that whenever we send out the forms and questionnaires to people, we can assume that there is some 10% dropout that is going to happen, that people are not going to reply. So that's why if we wanted 150 participants with completed answers, so that's why we always overdo and we went to like around 180 participants. So how we had created was we created like a long questionnaire, making sure that we are not crossing 15 to 20 minutes of their time, because after that people start losing focus, and then we start getting like one word answers, which we didn't definitely want. So those questionnaires also, the questionnaire was also a mix of objective and subjective questions, because just to have a good mix. So imagine if all of us were users and we are filling a form, you need to have a good experience. So if I ask you long answers everywhere, then it's going to be very strenuous and painful. So having some questions where you can just tick an option, some questions where you can write out a little bit, some questions where people could record a selfie video and send it to us, because we know that a lot of us are not great in articulating when we are writing, but if you're speaking, it's easier. So that's why we tried to mix the formats of answers that we were getting. And just for the simplicity, because sometimes you don't need to innovate everywhere. So just for the simplicity, we used Google Forms to send it to people because it's easy for everybody to access it, and everybody knows how to use it. So we sent like Google Forms. And at the end, like how any Google form responses are received, we received like long Excel sheets. So this is where the driest part of the process sometimes start, where you get overloaded with a lot of information. So we got responses in Excel sheets. And then that's where the little bit of manual work and a little bit of AI tools work came into the picture, that we were trying to analyze and make sense of the kind of responses we were getting. So all in all, we had kept aside around 3 weeks to conduct research with 2 to 3 weeks to conduct research with around 180 participants. So that's the time sometimes we take to like reach out to participants and then make sure the forms and everything is filled, and then we've gotten the answers back.
Got it. Now, while this was happening and the participants had their forms and that data gathering was happening, on the other hand, in parallel, I mean, we're aware that we were also doing secondary data
Yeah.
research to kind of map broader trends. What role did you think that this research played in, the approach of the report? And also, how did this secondary data kind of help contextualize our findings? How did it kind of help validate key insights? At that point, we were still at the gathering stage. I think the validation
Yeah.
would come later. But what role did you think that, at this time when we were gathering this data, was it, giving you a shape, a certain direction, a certain observation of macro, micro trends?
Yeah, I think that definitely happened with the secondary research, because as a process, what we did, we started with secondary first, and then when we had crossed, say, I think 1 or 2 weeks of reading, then that's when we started the quantitative study. So this secondary research really helped us in getting that macro picture of what's happening in the country, uh, what kind of behaviors and innovation is happening in the country in this space already. That really helped us in understanding what kind of, say, one is that what kind of fintech, say, or well tech platforms and apps are emerging, what kind of new ways of investments are coming up, with like NFTs and crypto and all other new ones which are coming up. So I think it helped us and our team also to come to the level of understanding the current realities, which also helped in creating questionnaires for the consumers. So whatever we were learning and reading from the secondary research, that some of it did get fed into the questionnaire building as well. Like some of the questions were crafted because we'd already read about it somewhere. So these two were not completely happening independently,
Right.
but it did have some bit of overlap. So secondary research helped in the context building, which helped in creating questionnaires, but also the secondary research really helped in getting those data points, really understanding the patterns, but more from the statistical perspective of sorts. Um, so I think those really also helps in building that entire holistic narrative when we are building a report or synthesis at the end, because it's very easy for any reader to just read one user quote and say that, but this is just this one person has said, why would I believe it? But when that gets backed with the secondary data and this whatever data points that we had found, it just becomes like a holistic story of sorts. So I think that's where it helps in validating some things that we heard later through the quantitative study and also the expert interviews.
Understood. Another thing we did was we spoke to industry experts. It was important for us to get their insights and their insider observations. What was our approach to selecting these experts, you'd say, and why do you think their perspective was crucial?
Um, it is always important to talk to people who are already in the field, who has seen, who understand the consumer side and also understand the business side of it. Because sometimes the secondary data gives us one picture, the consumers give us like that one picture from their perspective. So these domain experts or industry experts are somebody who understands both the sides. So our goal was basically to learn from their experience of being in the industry for a longer period, having worked with like the new upcoming innovations and technologies and new platforms. So that was our intention, and hence the way we tried to reach out to experts were also experts from different backgrounds. So even though we wanted to understand the wealth management and wealth tech industry as a whole, we made sure that we are trying to tap into different kinds of expertise. So we spoke with somebody who has worked in the banking and finance sector, but understands consumer insights a lot more because he has worked a lot with consumers. He has interacted with consumers from for different companies. So he understands that perspective really well with the banking and finance background. We spoke to, of course, some of the wealth management experts who are themselves wealth management advisors of sorts for different financial services. We spoke to, say, I think somebody who worked in the investment industry, who has experience of dealing and interacting with some of these fintech companies and startups. So, getting like different perspectives from these experts were really helpful. That getting consumer perspective from somebody else, somebody who works in the bank, somebody who works in a wealth management industry, somebody who is an investor or works with the investment domains and industry. I think so that different. We also spoke to a designer who has worked in like a fintech platform. So I think just getting this different angles and perspectives and insights really help
So we
in
had
getting that view.
Yes. So we had the user point of view and the user journey and the user stories. And then we had the larger macro and micro trends that we were seeing across the country in the domain, in personal habits, in personal hesitations. And then we also had the insider perspective, which is people who were involved in the fintech industry, whether it was in the investment space, whether it was in designing products,
Yeah,
whether it was with interacting with users, real-time users on a real-time basis and knowing their stories at a personal level also and having their own observations. Of course, they also read about industry trends and are updated with industry trends. So we had all of that kind of come together to create like a more holistic picture, even though, like it was 160 participants, but the idea was to have it backed by a lot of data,
yeah,
by a lot of insights and observations, make sure that what we're saying finally is not in isolation. It is reflective of a larger whole, and close close accurately to the larger whole as possible with the segment that we had of people that we spoke to. um
correct, correct.
what I'd also like to ask you is, out of the experts that we spoke to, which perspectives stood out to for us? Like, which were the ones that we thought were pretty insightful or shed new light, or gave us a deeper understanding of a trend or behavior, anything that comes to your mind?
I think what really helped to understand from these domain expertise and experts were like, especially like people who have worked with these consumers around wealth and managing their wealth, is also to, it's nice to say when here when people, these experts also ended up saying that somebody is saying that they want to invest in a certain way, but when it actually happens, how differently they behave. So, like, and getting their experiences of first-hand interacting with these consumers and their behaviors really help. Or the insights that they shared, which we wouldn't have gotten from, say, the consumers for sure, because these are the experts who found, say, the gaps. For example, like somebody talking about how personal finance management is something that is there is a need or there is a gap, and why companies are not doing it, but why consumers need it. So this bridging the gap between the business side and the consumer side with their own reflection and experience, I think these linkages were something that were really great and helpful for us to understand because these are the experts who are able to identify and understand the gaps that lie today in the industry, or they could give us a lot more reasonings in terms of why consumer is behaving the way they are behaving. Because from consumers, we end up understanding their behavior, but the reasons for it are something that are very important to focus on. And these experts definitely shed light a lot on that, like the reasons for it.
Yeah.
Uh, for the way consumers behave.
Right. I think one of the striking ones for me also was speaking to Soumitra Bhatt, who talked about how we view wealth as consumption
Yeah,
rather than, maybe how much money we have invested, or, what is our wealth portfolio like, but more like our consumption ability. And this is something that we saw also in the secondary research emerging, that
yeah,
the newer generation, the younger generation looks at wealth as the ability to consume or the ability to lead a certain particular lifestyle. That was very interesting,
Correct.
personally, for me to also enlightening to see how that came about.
Yeah. Yeah, because it all just ties very well together. Because also, if you remember, just to take the same point forward, if you see from our consumer interview research as well, we ended up seeing a lot of people saying that they're saving money for what? And a lot of answers that we got, the pattern we got was about like buying a house, buying a car, or like taking vacations or marriages, which has been there conventionally for generations in our country. But other than marriages, there are a lot of consumables that were the goals that people were working towards because um, that was something that we wanted to understand what are the short term and long term goals that people are saving for. So then when you look at this data coming from the consumers and say how Soumitra talked about or other experts also talked about like spending power shows the wealth for a lot of people. So this together just makes it a lot more uh, articulated point of view. And it just links a lot of these broader thoughts together.
Got it. Which now brings me to the actual linking of all of these things together,
The messiest part.
the messiest part, the synthesis of it. So beyond, we collected all of this data, but synthesis was such a crucial step.
Yeah.
You spoke about AI tools. We use tools like Miro and Dovetail to break down these insights. Could you talk about this process a little bit and how it actually shaped, the final report?
Yeah, definitely. I think the synthesis was, as I said, like it was the messiest, but I think that's the beauty of it. You have to go through it to see the other side, and then when you have clarity and insights visible to you, it feels like a great task has been achieved. So as we started discussing right now also that since it was a multi approach or like mixed method research approach, we were getting insights and learnings from three different angles. Like we had data from secondary research, we had insights from quantitative study, and we had insights from the expert interviews. So we had a lot of data on all of these three research methods. So for example, just to give an idea that the secondary research, just the raw data that we had collected, we had some 100 to 100 pages, just data collected. Because when you're collecting data, you don't filter, you filter it later. Um, we had data coming from 160, 150, 160 participants coming in, and all of their answers and videos and everything. So we had that a lot of pool of data. And then, of course, like the consumer expert interviews that we had collected. So, what we did was, I would say it was structured, but it's still a little bit of organic process that we follow to make sense of it. So we started making sense of it individually, and then at a midpoint, we started connecting all of them together.
Right.
To give you like a very quick idea, how we did that was also through the secondary research. For example, the way we collected secondary research data points. We had, I think I'll come to that later when we are talking about Dovetail. But from the so what we did, we started with using quantitative data and the insights that we had gotten from people. So one way we tried to understand and read that data that we had gotten from the second quantitative study was also trying to see some patterns and trying to answer some of the questions that we were getting. For example, who seem to be the decision maker in their life. Um, how regularly are people tracking their wealth and their money and trying to see a pattern? So all the charts that you see are from the data of our users, like 160 people. Out of them, how many were behaving in what way? So we tried to analyze that in this way, which was one way of analyzing it. Like where are people investing today? And we clearly saw like mutual funds were like on top number and their preference. So just this made a lot of things clearer for us, like the behavioral patterns that we were seeing of the people based on their answers. So these were all articulation and assimilation of the responses that we had gotten directly from our consumers. So
Right.
this was one touch point that we did.
Yeah.
The another one that we did, I think a lot of I would say designers would be very familiar with this anyways, which is we used Miro to do a lot of post-its work. For researchers, we call it like affinity map, where you're trying to make sense of it. You're creating clusters. Uh, so So Miro looked like any other Miro from a zoomed out perspective.
Yeah.
But what we did was basically we digged a lot deeper into one by one question, like the kind of questions we had in quantitative data in terms of, just for an instance, that who are the influencers in your life when you're talking about wealth and wealth management. So from all the answers, we tried to go through all the answers, try to create some observations, some patterns through it. So that's how we ended up analyzing and filtering out some of the questions of quantitative data. Again, that correlating those post-its work with the data that the or the pie charts that we had already created. So just to make a holistic sense, like for example, when it comes to influencers in people's lives, so qualitatively, this is what people are saying,
Right.
and the data that they are talking about is how does that match up together.
Yeah.
So that's how we tried to make sense of the feedback that we had gotten from there.
Yeah.
This was second way we were trying to analyze the quantitative data. And of course, then we used Dovetail. I'm sure there are a lot of other platforms as well. And since all of these platforms are also quite a lot, I would say, work in progress as well. Uh, so I would say like some features work really great and some features still, I think there is a possibility of improvement. Um, so we use Dovetail mainly. I would quickly show how it looked. Um, yeah. So we basically collected data and dumped it on the Dovetail platform, which was mix of expert interviews, secondary research, and user insights or user feedback that we had gotten from quantitative studies. So this was one place that we almost 80% of raw data got collected.
Right.
Then we did some meta tagging to just tag all the insights. We had identified some tags that made sense. This, of course, was also coming from the secondary research that we had already done because we already knew what is sort of insights and what sort of behaviors are coming up.
Yeah.
So we did some tagging work that we could tag everything that we were looking at in the raw data. And then all the tags were then collated together to make this, again, another way of affinity mapping, which is, uh, sorry, we created some clusters based on each consumer feedback, secondary data point, expert interviews, all of it together, and then again did some affinity mapping.
Yes.
So these affinity maps definitely helped in saving a lot of time to just start seeing patterns very quickly. So the tagging, the AI tools definitely helped in saving a lot of times to go through so much of raw data, which takes a lot of time. So we did take help of some of the clustering methods that AI does on the platform, but there was a lot of manual intervention again happening over it because the way the platform clusters happens very linearly, but sometimes we need to cluster it and make sense of it non-linearly, and hence we did take some support, but I would say there was a lot of manual work that was happening afterwards. So when we clustered, so you would see like there were clusters happening on different platforms, which then came together when we started making a narrative for the report. So the goal was to go from a really long list of raw data to consolidated clusters and insights and behaviors and patterns of the consumers.
Got it. So when we did the quantitative graphs, that was something that was put together basis the Excel sheet responses and actually quantifying how many people responded in what way, what were the overlaps, and therefore arriving at the graphs. Secondary data was something that we used Dovetail Miro for? Dovetail.
Yeah, secondary we did mostly manually and a little bit of Dovetail.
secondly, mostly manually and a little bit of dovetail. And then
Yeah,
Miro was really where put together all of the affinity mapping, like you said, where it was paired with quotes from actual users, quotes from experts, relevant pieces of secondary data information that we picked together, and larger themes that were emerging across all of the answers that we were getting. As you said, that was non-linear because people could have said one thing at another time, it could connect to another larger theme. So
correct.
it was really a mammoth exercise.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think similar to like how we use different research methods for different goals, I think we ended up using different methods of synthesis for different research methods. Uh, because the data that came in was in different formats, which needed to be analyzed differently.
Understood. Were there any unexpected patterns or insights that emerged during this analysis? Anything that you weren't really seeing as a part of the secondary data that we were seeing? Anything that was not a part of perhaps the way we were looking at the research study itself? Were there any such unexpected patterns or insights that emerged during the course of this synthesis?
Uh, I would say it was not completely unexpected, but I think it gave the research gave us a lot of evidence and confidence in saying that. Like, for example, when we talk about financial literacy or financial education in our country, for example, I mean, I can talk about for our country because I've done mostly research here in this context, but um, it's very vaguely said that, oh, we have very low financial literacy, nobody understands anything. But when we say it very loosely, it just feels like, where is it coming from? Like, all of us are educated, we understand so many things, we use so many apps, so of course we know how we use it. So there are like two ways. One, a lot of people say that we don't have financial education or literacy. And one side, a lot of people say that since there are so many apps, people are investing in stocks and NFTs and cryptos, like teenagers are doing it. So of course there is literacy, and of course people are aware about things. But when we actually spoke to people, when we heard from participants, we realized that just because I think it's also part of our report as well, that which says that just because people have access to financial products and platforms, that does not equate to having financial literacy.
Yeah.
And that was also something that was we somewhere knew, but I think we got a lot of reasonings to it or a lot of evidence from the consumers from it as well. Is that we also heard that a lot of people being lost, that even if I'm using X particular platform to invest, the app is very easy to use. The apps are being designed very amazingly. Like the usability is great, the UI is great, language is very understandable, but the fundamental decision making dilemmas that people face still exist.
Yeah.
That just because the app is easy and just because it makes me invest in a particular stock very easily doesn't mean I know if I should invest in that or not. What
Correct.
is going to happen if I invest, or what is going to happen if I don't invest in that? So I think these risk managements or like the dilemmas of decision making primarily still exist. So I think that was something that was really great and interesting for us to know that how are these platforms being designed? Maybe the aim is to simplify financial interactions, but the financial literacy and fundamentals of understanding something, the context or what happens if I invest money and the market is going up and low, what should I do? When is the right time to take out the money and things like that. So we heard a lot of people talk about that quite vocally. So that was quite interesting to see. So I think the research really helped in getting those evidences and reasonings for the same point.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. In fact, like you said, it's a little bit of a no-brainer, right? Like, I mean, we're all mostly well educated. Everyone knows, has control over their finances, has some reasonable amount of rationalization behind why this and why that. But then when you actually get down to brass tacks, how much
Yeah.
financial literacy exists? What are the fears? What are the dilemmas?
Yeah.
What is the fragmented market with so many different investment options? Like, where do people put in their trust? Who do they listen to? I think that was
Yeah.
a very interesting portrait that kind of emerged of both, hopes and fears of people, and also their needs. Like, what is it that they're looking for in an
Correct.
investment product? Which brings me to the last set of questions that I have for you, almost done, which is, uh, any thoughts on how research like this can drive actionable, meaningful change in fintech and wealth management? Something that's not just another research study, but something that is deeply actionable.
Yeah, I think definitely such research should be, I think, done more and more. Uh, but also, it's also, I would say, a tricky situation where it becomes very important for the researchers, and I would say it's researchers' responsibility as well to translate this research from a 200-page just words into some form of actionables. Because when you are doing research, when you're actually in field or when you're talking to people, you start seeing a lot of gaps, for example, for innovation, that this can be done, this can be done. And it's not just about building a good looking, great usability, and a very swanky looking, say, for example, a product, but there are a lot of gaps fundamentally that lie which can be solved with a lot of innovation. So I think it is very crucial to convert the research into actionables, because it's very easy and partly understandable for a lot of companies to just take research reports with just a lot of words. Because nobody today would want to read like 300 page just words and just insights. Only nerds can, or only the researchers who know research loves to read such reports. So there has to be an angle where you convert this into and speak the language of the readers and try and make sure that the people who are reading or who you want to target and influence are getting something actionable from your research. So for our research as well, we try to convert it to the level where we could try and go to the feature level suggestions, or there could be some UX related or innovation opportunities that could be tapped into the fintech space, or even what are the bigger principles that a design like a fintech company or a wealth tech company should follow, which will have basis in the consumer insights, behaviors, and patterns that we are seeing. So even if giving that broad level framework of sorts also becomes helpful and great starting point for companies to start building on, because that switch from a lot of words to some action and some frameworks, I think definitely is helpful for companies to build on. And then it's more about companies individually figuring out who their target audience is and then doing a very specific investigation for that. Because such research and such reports still can be felt that it talks about a broader perspective. And for each company, maybe they need some section of it which needs a little bit of a deeper digging and investigation, which can be done as a step two. This is not like a holy grail that this is the only place you can get all the answers. So there can be second research, third research followed by this. But such researches should definitely instigate conversations and give something to companies to hold on to as actionables.
Absolutely. And what do you think? How was Canvas's approach like in making sure that this was an actionable study and not just, like you said, one with valuable observations, but perhaps no real direction in which to take certain concrete steps? So, how do you think Canvas's approach was in this regard?
Yeah, I think it was really great to see Canvas as even though being a product company and a design focused company, coming up with a topic which is very broad, which is very based in an interest in knowing what consumers are thinking today, because there could be a lot of product reports which talks about which products are doing good and which products are doing on which platforms are performing in what way. But I think understanding this consumer side was great to see for Canvas to have interest and initiative in. and then making sure and then go running with the research team in terms of uh, even though I mean running with the research team the way they were trying to handle the way they think the research needs to be taken forward. So I think being open for that was also amazing to see, and a great support and a great partner definitely to work with. And of course, like not leaving the research at just research, but also since you also come from a product design and design background and the team works around that, I think that was definitely a great support to make sure how can we translate it into some kind of actionable, something that maybe other product companies can understand and can relate to. So I think that hand holding and working collaboratively end to end, like right from the inception to the report and the design of the report and how it needs to be articulated. So I think that was great to have as a collaborative partner on board.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We also had a lot of fun. It was a lot of intense work on your part, and it was also a lot of fun to, finally have so much good data to work with and then, condense it in designed report that could be consumed by people at large. Any final thoughts that you have on our collaboration? What made it work? Anything you'd like to add? That's my last question.
No, I think I partly spoke about it, but I think it definitely was great. I think we have been looking for some opportunity to collaborate and work together for some time now, but we are very glad that this actually happened and we made it happen and it went through it and the report is now out, launched, and we are guessing that the response has been good from your side as well. So I don't think I have any reflections very differently than I've spoke about. Is that it was a great, very seamless collaboration. We didn't have to like struggle a lot in terms of convincing that we need to do this research because of XYZ. I think we were already on board uh, with the thought that research is needed to figure out some insights around the topic. So it was great experience on our part as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikita. That is all of my questions. That's like all of it. We
All
are
right. Thank you so much.